I worked at the local butcher shop for a man named George. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that man was sent from hell itself for one mission, to be a butcher. The longer I worked there, the further I fell into his trap. The rules for the job were not like any others I'd ever had before. They were strange, almost paranoid, though I never questioned them. Not until the night I broke one. That's when everything changed. I took the job to make some extra money, but now I'm in too deep. Things have happened that cannot be reversed. He cannot and will not stop unless someone makes him. With how things have gone in this whole fucked up saga, I fear that I will have to be the one to do it. I never thought I would ever be put in a situation like this, and yet, here I am. Hopefully, I can put an end to this, but in case I go missing, I want people to know my story. You need to know the truth about Red Hill Meats and the monster behind the counter. It all started about a few months ago. I had finished the week sore, dirty, and dead tired, just like the last 3 before it. I was working a temp job at a distribution center on the second shift. Temp work doesn't promise much more than muscle aches and a few crumpled bills at the end of the week. I was stuck in a loop of torment, a literal hell that I couldn't find my way out of, but I needed the money. At the time, there was no way I could find anything better with my disreputable past as an ex-con. I had gotten into some drug trouble when I was younger, causing me to miss out on almost all of the good jobs. I can't say I blame them, though. A felony charge doesn't look too good on a resume, and nobody wants to take that risk if they can avoid it. I had been staying in my cousin's garage during that time. There was no AC and no insulated walls, just concrete floors and brick. I ran an extension cord through the window to a box fan, which ran almost 24/7. It was the only relief I got from the oppressive summer heat. The measly paycheck I made per week was mostly spent on food and paying my cousin for crashing at his place. The only nice part about it was that he had a small built-in bathroom attached to the garage, so I didn't have to go upstairs to use it. Honestly, I was barely surviving. I needed a change. It was a Friday night and the end of another grueling work week when I stopped at the station on 39th and Holloway for my weekly beer run. The sun had already drifted behind the horizon. The air was thick with humidity, making it hard to breathe. I was walking up to the door, grabbing the handle, when I saw it. A yellow, stained piece of paper, curling at the edges, was pinned to a cluttered corkboard outside the station's door. It was handwritten in black marker, smeared by the rain. It was barely legible, but it jumped out at me. Something about it caught my eye, but I couldn't place it. I shuffled over to the corkboard, grabbing the paper in my hand. It read, "Help wanted. Apprentice butcher. No experience needed. Cash paid weekly. Ask for George." I stared at it for a while, letting the words settle into my mind. Apprentice butcher. It sounded like something that I could grow with. Something real. I wouldn't be just a number on a shift in some shitty warehouse. No, I would be somebody. I would be someone that people depended on to deliver fresh meat every day. The prospect of hard and rewarding work appealed to me. I had always wanted to belong. I thought that, maybe, this could be my ticket. I could actually learn something with this and maybe get my own place one day. Getting paid cash weekly wasn't bad either. To me, that meant it would most likely be under the table and tax-free, with no temp agency taking its cut at the end of the week. I called the number the next afternoon. A man with a deep, raspy voice picked up on the first ring. "Red Hill Meats, how may I help you?" he asked. Anxiety shot through me. I had only done this once or twice before when I was younger. Hello, my name is Tom. I'm calling about the apprentice butcher position. I was told to ask for George. I said, clearly showing my nervousness. "You got 2 hands?" he asked sternly. "Yeah," I responded, not thinking how stupid the question was. "You afraid of blood?" "No, sir," I answered. "Come in tonight at 8. Wear boots." Click. I held the phone to my ear for a minute or so after he hung up, in shock. I had become so nervous that I wouldn't get the job that I had almost talked myself out of it. I had tried not to get my hopes up before calling, but somehow I had gotten the job. The first thought that crossed my mind was how this could lead to me being able to leave my cousin's garage. I thought that this path would possibly allow me to move into my own place sometime down the road, where I could experience true freedom. I began to dream big. I could now at least start to move forward with my life. It may be slow and hard, but it'd at least be moving in the right direction. As I laid the phone down, I began to think about what the work might look like. There would be cold rooms, sharp knives, and maybe a blood-stained apron. Hard work for sure, but not pointless. This job had a purpose. I had a purpose. I didn't have a plan, but I had a name and a time. I took a nap for a couple of hours before getting dressed and heading down to the butcher shop. The place looked like it had been there since the Eisenhower administration. On the corner of 16th and Crenshaw sat a small, square building tucked behind a closed-down VFW. The red brick building stood out amidst all of the modern storefronts. It looked like it had been plucked out of the past and sat directly on that corner. There was no signage except a metal cleaver bolted to a leaning post that had "Red Hill Meats" written across it in cursive font. I examined the exterior as I neared the front door. There were no hours listed and no lights out front for customers. The place honestly creeped me out. For a moment, I had second thoughts. Maybe I should just leave. I thought, just go back to my temp job. I probably wouldn't be good at this stuff anyway. I stood, staring at the windows, when a passing car honked at a cat that had run in front of it, shaking me out of my trance. I shook off the feelings of creepiness and gathered the courage to open the front door and walk in. The bell above the door jangled as I stepped inside. The interior was cold and smelled like sawdust and copper. A tinge of iron and rot hung in the air behind the coppery smell, like an old surgical theater. The place had a strange vibe. It wasn't like any butcher shop I had ever been in before. It had the kind of aroma that crawls up into your sinuses and builds a nest there, never letting you forget it. A few empty chairs sat against the wall next to the door. They were old and caked in dust. They looked like they hadn't been used in years. Next to the chairs was an old newspaper stand that held 2 curled and yellowed papers. I walked over and grabbed the paper, interested in what the date might be. The text was mostly faded, but I could make out a faintly printed date at the top of the first paper, February 19, 1979. Wow, this place is pretty damn old, I said under my breath as I investigated the paper. I knew that butcher shops weren't very popular anymore, but I figured this one would at least have a newspaper with the correct date up front. I put down the paper and walked further into the shop. I leaned over the front counter, looking across at the hallway in the back. "Hello," I called out. "George, are you here?" "It's me, Tom." I didn't receive an answer, but I could hear a squelching noise coming from deep inside the shop. Curiosity overtook me as I pulled open the small door that separated the front of the shop from the rest of it. I peeked behind a curtain where I had heard the sounds coming from. A man was standing by the bone saw, hands and arms covered in blood. He was chopping a large piece of meat that looked like a ham. He was wiry, with silver hair clipped close to the scalp and eyes that didn't blink, even as the cleaver slammed into the meat and bone. He stared intently into the meat as he chopped, never flinching from his work. He wore a white butcher's coat that had been washed so many times the bloodstains looked like a watercolor painting. Long smears of blood swirled into one another, blending shades of red and pink into one homogeneous blob. "George?" I asked shyly. He stopped abruptly, freezing his swing midair at the intrusion. The cleaver hung above his head, ready to be brought down once more. He turned his head quickly toward me, slowly lowering the blade to the chopping block simultaneously. "You the kid who called?" he asked. "Yeah," I answered, swallowing my nervousness. He looked back down at the block, laying the cleaver down on the table. He grabbed a rag and began wiping the blood and cracked bone from his arms. "You eat meat?" he asked, looking down at his arms as he cleaned them. "Sure," I answered confidently, trying to impress him. "Good. Vegans don't last here," he said, chuckling heartily. He leaned over the table and jostled some items around. He turned and tossed me a pair of gloves and a thick black apron. "We start now," he said with a wide, intense smile. I thought there would be some kind of orientation or a tour, but no. He turned back toward the cutting table, continuing his work. I was confused. Did he just expect me to start cutting without instruction? I thought this could be my first test. Maybe he wanted to see if I could take it working here. I tied the apron around my waist and slid the gloves on my hands before slowly approaching the cutting table next to George. He shot me a glance, smiling wryly and muttering something under his breath that I couldn't quite hear. He grabbed another piece of meat, sliding it across the table. With one swift motion, he lifted his cleaver and slammed it down against the wood, easily splitting the meat and severing the bone in half. Seeing him cut so effortlessly made me nauseous. The sound of the meat and tendons tearing, along with the sickening crunch of bone snapping, made my skin crawl. I stood there, too petrified to move, observing his movement. He turned to look at me, his smile quickly twisting into a frown. "You're not quitting on me, are ya?" he asked. My eyes instinctively shot down at the bloody cleaver. His hands gripped it so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I pulled my gaze up to his eyes, which were filled with intense focus. No, sir. I stuttered. I was just observing you before I started. I played along, not wanting to get fired on my first day. He let out an exasperated breath and laid the cleaver down. He wiped his hands on his apron and held them up in front of him. If you wanna keep this job, kid, you gotta follow the rules, he said. His voice boomed with immense weight, hammering into my brain that his rules weren't just policy, they were the law. He raised a finger. 1. Never be late. He said, never breaking eye contact with me. We work while the town sleeps. The shop opens at 8 p.m. sharp and closes at 4 a.m. If you miss a shift, you don't come back. A second finger rose from his fist. 2. Don't talk to the customers. Not unless they talk to you first. And if they ask questions, any at all, keep your answers short or come get me. The skin on his face tightened, and the intensity in his eyes peaked as he raised a third finger. 3. Stay away from cooler number 7. I don't care if it's unlocked, leaking, or making noise. You don't go near it. Ever. After he told me the third rule, the intensity in his eyes seemed to dissolve as quickly as it had appeared. He smiled and lowered his hand. Simple, right? I nodded, trying to hide the chill crawling up my spine. No matter how uncomfortable it felt, I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. I was working at the butcher shop now. I would have to perform and follow his rules, whether I liked it or not.